Hey, folks, welcome to the second in our series of events previewing next year's legislative sessions. I'm Reed Wilson, and today we're going to chat with three red state leaders to find out what Republican-led states are going to prioritize next year. We're happy to be joined by Utah House Speaker Mike Schultz, Iowa Senate President Amy Sinclair, and West Virginia House Speaker Roger Hanshaw. So let's dive right in. First up is Utah House Speaker Mike Schultz. Speaker Schultz is serving his fifth term in the House, where he represents his hometown of Hooper, right on the shores of the Great Salt Lake, and he's about to begin his first term as Speaker. So welcome and congratulations, Speaker Schultz.
Thank you, Reed. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today.
Well, great. I'm glad you're here. There's still a good month to go before Utah lawmakers reconvene. What are the priorities that you're setting for legislators ahead of next year's session?
Well, hey, thank you. First of all, I appreciate it. And we do have about 30 days before we start our legislative session. Utah is unique. We have one of the shortest, I actually think it is the shortest legislative session out of all the states. We have 45 days and we do our budget every year and we do policy every year. And so we have to do all that within 45 days. So the lead up to the session is super important. It really starts probably mid-October. It almost feels like session started for many of us. But we work with our colleagues in the House to determine what their priorities are. And then we work with the Senate to determine what the Senate's priorities are. And then we work with the governor's office and the governor to determine what his priorities are. And then we try to come together and package them all together and see where there's overlap. This year, we're seeing quite a bit of overlap in regards to federalism. We have a huge problem with the Biden administration pushing all the government regulations, the federal government regulations onto the states. And in many cases, they just don't work for us, Reed. They simply don't work. And we can get into what those are in a minute, but that's going to be a big part of this year's session, is pushing back on the federal overreach. Specifically when it comes to energy and a few other things, and then higher education. It's interesting. It's become a big nationwide thing. You see the university president, Penn State, just resigned. The others that testified in front of Congress. But we were actually a little bit ahead of this. This started for us late last. I'm going to say spring, or this last spring, we started seeing some problems inside our higher education system. And when you start to see businesses try to figure out ways not to get the kids before they go into higher ed, it's problematic, I think. And so we want to keep higher education relevant in Utah. We have one of the lowest tuition rates I think the third lowest tuition rates out of anywhere in the nation. And so we want to continue to have that, but there's some reforms that need to happen inside higher ed. So those are a few of the things, and I'm happy to go into more details if you'd like, but those are a couple of the biggest. Oh, and then also the cost of inflation and the affordability that we're seeing all across the nation right now due to inflation. And so that's going to be a top priority. We've cut taxes in Utah for the last 3 years. It's been easy to do because we've all seen budget surpluses. Well, this year we still have a budget surplus, but it's only by a very slim margin. Once you take into the things that we have to do, that's as far as giving an increase to our state employees and giving an increase to education. It pretty much takes most of our money, but we're going to go through the budget and we're going to do some cuts, and we're still going to try to give a significant tax break to the citizens of the Utah just to help with that, because we want to go 4 years straight cutting taxes. So
yeah. You mentioned some energy requirements that the federal government has imposed. Talk a little bit about that. What's happening in the energy space in Utah?
Well, so just recently, the EPA passed a rule called OTR, Ozone Transfer Rule, and the data was not sound that they used. In fact, it was manipulated, we feel. We won our first round in court on that, and so we got to stay, and so we're going to continue that through the court process. But essentially what it would do is, pretty much shut down any coal-fired generated energy in the state of Utah. And the majority of the energy in the state of Utah comes from coal-fired power plants. And so we're not opposed to transitioning away from the coal-powered fire plants, but that takes time. And the question then becomes, then what? Well, a lot of other coal-powered plants are switching over to natural gas. Well, we'd love to switch over to natural gas, but because we have so much federal land in the state of Utah, we can't get the pipelines across the federal land to get the natural gas to those power plants. And so that's not an option. Now, if we could get the permits to get it across there, we'd love to switch over, at least explore the idea of switching over to natural gas. Then you look at, well, nuclear. Nuclear is maybe a way forward. That's 10 to 20 years permitting a nuclear site. And so, we can't shut down our only, not our only, but the majority of our, well, it's really our only dispatchable, reliable energy that we have in this state, and switch completely over to renewables. It just doesn't work. Simply, it does not work, especially when you look at we're expected to double our energy use, power use over the next 10 to 20 years. And so, we're seeing an increase in demand for energy. So, we need to take the all of the above approach. We're certainly for renewables, whether it's solar or wind or whatever it is. We're for those energy developments as well, and we're doing a lot of that in the state of Utah, and we'll continue to do a lot of that in the state of Utah. But we can't kill our reliable, dispatchable energy source. It just doesn't work, and so that's one of the biggest things.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned wanting to cut taxes for the fourth year in a row. Lawmakers just recently voted to set aside $160 million for another tax cut in the coming year. I mean, with the changing budget conditions that you referred to, is there any concern that you're going to cut yourself sort of into a fiscal hole?
Yeah. So, we've heard that the last 3 years that we've cut taxes from the left, honestly, that they think that we're being irresponsible in doing that. But I would say just the opposite. I would say we need to do this. Utahns, and this isn't just true to Utahns. I mean, it is harder and harder to make a living nowadays with inflation, and our dollars just don't go as far, and the wages has not kept up with inflation. And so we need to do all we can for the citizens of the state. And, our budget, even though we've cut taxes, it's still grown at a faster pace than what inflation has and what our population has grown. And so we feel like there's some efficiencies in government that we're going to take a look at. And a lot of that, honestly, is going to be found in higher ed. That's an area where we think we can find some efficiencies there, and find some money to continue that tax cut. And Reed, it's not a lot of money when you look at it, on a yearly basis. But if you take cumulatively the last 3 years, I mean, we'll be approaching close to $1.5 billion budget cut, which is a significant amount. It's getting close to 10%. So.
Yeah, yeah. Governor Cox has put out a budget plan that makes addressing homelessness and housing affordability a big priority. How do you address these skyrocketing housing costs? And you mentioned population growth in the state that's growing faster than any other in America.
Well, you do it by supply and demand, right? We let the free market work. So we've done that with our rentals. We've really pushed in the state of Utah, our cities, and everybody to increase the amount of rentals that they have, and we're now actually seeing rental prices drop in the state of Utah, which is good, because they've been increasing at 15 to 20% the last couple of years, and so to actually see them decrease 3 or 4% this year is a good thing, and it's because of all the supply that's been brought on. Now we really need to take and turn that focus onto home ownership, and really, try to increase the amount of homes available for our kids to buy and our grandkids to buy. And so that's what we're going to do. Same thing that we did with, the rentals pool. We're going to do the same thing on the for sale product for our kids and our grandkids to promote home ownership. And it's interesting, Reed, some of the more liberal side of our body and the Democrats in the state really tried to push these government handout programs instead of increasing the supply, which, if you don't increase the supply and you just add more money to it, it just drives the cost even higher. And so we knew that didn't work and wouldn't work. So we stayed away from that, and we really went to pushing and increasing the supply. And so that's what we're going to do on the home ownership side, is really work to try to increase the supply.
Gotcha. Utah has passed one of the first bills last year aimed at protecting kids from harmful content on social media by requiring parental permission for children to get a social media account. Do you expect any more changes to that bill? I mean, there's been some litigation in other states that have raised questions about their version. What about in Utah?
Well, we've been litigated in Utah as well, and we're so far we're winning in the courts. We're very grateful for that. But the numbers are astounding when it comes to the mental health problems that we're seeing with our kids, and it all points back to social media. And so we need to find a balance. I think one of the things that we're going to really try and focus on this year is an education, helping our parents understand how important it is to actually have the conversations with your kids. I know I catch myself doing stuff on, it's not always social media, but just work or whatever, emails and stuff, and I'm not engaging with my family like I should. And luckily, my wife brings me back to reality every once in a while and reminds me how important it is to engage and engage with our kids, and she keeps our kids off of social media and engaging in the family. And, I think sometimes we all need some of those reminders. And so I think that's one of the things that we can do, is run an education campaign, helping our parents understand the reasons why, and some of the things we need to do to continue to engage with our kids.
Yeah. I think a lot of people in eastern states especially don't always appreciate the role that water plays in the West, and especially in states in the Colorado River Basin like Utah. Can you give us a sense of sort of how critical water issues are to Utah? And are there any legislative remedies that you might have to take up this year?
Yeah, no, so we had to start taking up water about 3 or 4 years ago, honestly. And we had to shift the mindset of Utahns. Utah is the second driest state in the nation. We've been fortunate because our forefathers and foremothers built a great reservoir system to where it hasn't been an issue. But when we hit the worst drought, we experienced the worst drought in 1,200 years. It was a 2 to 3 year drought. It's the worst drought that on record in the last 1,200 years. And it really showed some of the strains that we had on our water system, and the mindsets that needed to change. So water's been one of the topic of conversations for the last couple of years. It's going to continue to be this year, even in a record amount of years. So we received almost a record amount of water this year, but it's still important that we shift our habits, and we're going to continue to do that.
Yeah. As you reflect on what the Utah legislature has done in recent years, is there something special that you've done that you think other states should be copying?
Oh, that's a great question. One of the things that I think sets Utah apart, there's two things I think sets Utah apart. Of course, we always have to deal with the day-to-day stuff, the hot topics of the day. DEI right now is a hot topic of the day. Higher education is a hot topic of the day. Inflation is a hot topic of the day that we're having to deal with. But I think one thing that sets Utah, makes Utah unique, is we take a long-term approach to things with the legislature, and we really look what's it going to be like 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road. Similar to what you would have to do when you're running a business, right? I mean, you can't just deal with the issues that are in front of you on a day-to-day basis. You have to take the long-term approach. I know when I was involved in business and running businesses, we'd look at what's not are we dealing with today, but what's it going to be like 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and even 20 years from now. And I think government even needs to take that a step further. And I think that's one of the things that's most frustrating to me watching the federal government, is they can't even figure out what's going on today. And really, we need to be looking into the future. And so that's one of the things I think sets Utah aside, is we look long-term and make decisions based on what's best 10, 20 years from now, not just what's best for today. And we're lucky too, because we had our former legislators that did that for us, and we're seeing the benefits from that today. And then also one of the things that I think sets Utah, makes Utah unique, is we have regular meetings with House leadership, Senate leadership, and the executive branch, our governor, on a weekly basis, honestly, to make sure that we're working through these issues together, collectively, collaboratively, so that when we can pass the best piece of legislation in the House, it doesn't get stuck in the Senate. And, when we pass the best piece of legislation in the House and the Senate, it doesn't get stuck and vetoed on the governor's desk. And so having those conversations early, working through the concerns through a collaborative process, we have found to be very beneficial. And it's really set Utah aside. I'm really surprised when I hear these other states that they don't have those regular meetings set up between House and Senate leadership and the governor. And so I'm very grateful that we do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's flip that question around then. Is there anything that you've seen pop up in other states that you want your legislators to deal with this year?
Yeah, that's a great question. We kind of talked about this a little bit a minute ago with water.
Mhm.
I look at some of these other states in the West that actually have more water than what Utah has. Again, Utah's the second driest state in the nation. And they have a lot better water conservation programs. They make their water go a lot further than what we do in Utah. And so that's an area where we need to learn and we need to do better. And we're going to continue to work on that and continue down that road, recognizing that we are the second driest state in the nation and the fastest growing state in the nation as well, and the number one economy in the nation. And so we have to recognize that, and we have to recognize that, again, looking long-term in advance, we've got enough water to meet our needs for today. We went through a 1,200-year drought, and we were able to get through it. But at the rate we're growing, we can't continue to look at water the same way we have looked at water in the past. And so that's one of the areas where we're looking at some of these other states like Nevada, Arizona, Arizona's got more water than Utah. And so, we're looking at some of these other states to see what they've done. Israel, I mean, we're looking at what's going on and what's happened in Israel, how they've solved their water shortages. And so we're learning.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, you've been very generous with your time. Thanks so much for being with us today, Speaker Schultz.
Thank you, Reed. I appreciate it. Been great.
Our thanks to Speaker Schultz. Before we get to our next conversation, I want to ask you to subscribe to Pluribus News. We spend every day reporting out legislative trends from across the country, and we can't do it without your support. So go to pluribusnews.com/subscribe. New individual members can apply the code New Year, all one word, all caps, to get 60% off your first year's membership. All right, now back to the show. I'm happy to welcome Iowa Senate President Amy Sinclair. She's serving her third term in office, representing the 14th District, which is south and east of Des Moines. And this is her first term running the state Senate. So Senator Sinclair, welcome.
Good morning, Reed. How are you?
Thanks all right.
For having me on.
Yeah. The Iowa legislature had just an incredibly busy year in 2023. And I know you have a lot on your plate for next year. What's left undone? What do you expect to prioritize in this year's session?
Yeah, there are going to be a handful of things I think that we're going to prioritize, and a lot of them are just carryovers from previous years. I know our first priority, just given where our budgets are and our ability to do so, will be to tackle some more changes to our tax code. We've done some pretty heavy lifts on streamlining and reducing our tax burden here in Iowa, just because we had so much on hand. That's a good indication that you're taking too much, and so we're going to continue to work on lowering our personal income tax rates, as well as we have those triggers in place that will continue to lower our corporate tax rates. And we've done a lot of work on property taxes as well. And so I think you'll see this year really continue to focus on that, as we've got just a very large budget balance still left on hand that we know we're still in really good shape fiscally. And so we're going to return that to the taxpayers of the state of Iowa. We've got a couple of education issues that the governor is making her priority, and so they will become most likely one of our priorities. We need to take a look at what we do specifically with our special needs kids, those students who learn a little differently than others or who need a little extra assistance. And so we've got some work to do surrounding our special education system, particularly with our area education agencies and how they deliver services to the local education agencies, those kids in local school districts. I know also that the governor would like to take a look at what our minimum teacher salaries are across the state and see how we can support that profession, and hopefully in the process of that, just draw more folks into wanting to become teachers. Iowa's not uncommon. I think across the nation we have a teacher shortage, and so Iowa's not out of the loop on that either. And so we're going to try and take a look at how we can address that shortage, whether through licensing or salaries. I think you'll see that being a priority this year as well. And finally, just a circle up from a bill we passed last year. We did an executive branch redesign, a state government redesign in this past year. We really cut down on the number of executive departments and those agencies. And so the next step in that process is to come in and look at our boards and commissions, which of those are necessary, which could be coupled with others. How could we streamline that delivery of service for state government for the folks in Iowa? I think that's going to be what you'll see from a high level, our priorities here in Iowa.
Yeah. As you think about your priorities in the year ahead, what's one thing that you all have done in Iowa in recent years that the rest of the nation should take note of and follow?
You know, I think last year when we passed universal school choice, so that parents could take the lead in their child's education, I think that's a pretty big deal. I think it's innovative. It brought some controversy, but I think ultimately families want to own their children's educations, and if we can do that by offering parents the opportunity to make those ground level decisions on where their child goes to school, I think that's a pretty big step in the right direction when we're looking at innovative ways to deliver education to kids. And I think you saw after we did that last year, several states also did the same. So I think you'll see more of that, and I would love for other states to follow our lead on that.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that because it felt like if there was any theme in this year's legislative sessions across the country, it was that expansion of the school voucher programs. And I mean, you all were first out of the gate in January. That felt to me like it was years of sort of behind the scenes work coming to fruition. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how that all came together?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to tell you, there hasn't been a year I've been in office that we haven't made some effort to localize the education of children, whether that was through adding flexibility for local school districts, whether that was through expanding open enrollment options, whether that was through supporting parental rights and changing up how school boards were elected. We've done all kinds of things to localize how we educate kids. People in communities know best what their children need. And this is a natural extension of that, frankly. It's not just the community's parents know best what their children need in an education. And so to say that this is a years-long process of behind-the-scenes work, absolutely. And it's not out of line with all of the things that Iowa has done over the years to really bring back the education of children to the people who know those children the best.
Yeah. In the months since expanding the voucher program, many more students than anticipated signed up in Iowa. And that's a common theme, too, that we've seen in some other states. But that also means the state is on the hook for a lot more spending than planned. I mean, is that a problem, or how do you address that?
Sure. Well, I mean, Iowa was in really good shape. We have a healthy budget balance. We had strong carryover. We have strong revenues. It's not going to be a huge problem for us. We were ready for it. We did not anticipate. We ended up with close to 19,000 students being awarded these scholarships. And we only anticipated somewhere in the range of 14,000. So yeah, it's about a 30% step above what we actually anticipated. But no, we have the funding there that's going to be available for it. Additionally, remember that this won't necessarily be new funding, as 40% of these students, 40% of these scholarships are from existing students that we were already funding at the state level. So while we talk about it being a lot of money, it's not the impact to the state budget that some would like you to believe it is. And so when you have that high of a number of new non-public school attendees, those are students that the state of Iowa was already funding for their educations. So we were already fiscally in a good spot to do it. We're happy that we're meeting the needs of parents and families and kids, and the hit isn't as big as you might think just on the surface, simply because those students were already students we were funding.
Gotcha. Okay. Flip my earlier question around then. What's something that you've seen happen in other states that you want Iowa to emulate?
Hmm. I guess that's I'm gonna have to think on that one. Give me just a second. We really take what we do here in Iowa and we take a look at what the people of Iowa have asked us for, and we've run with it. Whether that's the tax cuts that we've done, whether that's the tort reform that we've done, whether that's school choice that we've done. We try to take a lead from the people that we serve, not necessarily looking outside of our state for that. So I would say that we probably want to put some protections in for medical providers related to conscience. And I know that's something that's happened in other states that I've heard that folks are interested in. Our state government chair is likely working on some additional election integrity issues, and so I think all states are looking at that, shoring up election integrity, and that's not a political commentary that it's not a right or a left issue. We want our elections to have the highest level of integrity we can get. So those would probably be a couple of items that we will see happening here in Iowa that we've seen from other states.
Yeah. Okay. Iowa was one of a few states to take up legislation restricting teen access to social media last year, but that bill didn't quite make it across the finish line. Do you expect lawmakers to take another look at social media companies?
A lot of times that's an individual legislator priority. I don't know that we have a priority within the caucus that would be one of the things that we take up. I would be unsurprised to see new legislation be introduced about it. I'm not sure that's necessarily a caucus priority. And so whether or not it passes the finish line would certainly be dependent on what the bill was and how the sponsor of the bill was able to get support.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. There was also a big disagreement this year over the future of carbon capture pipelines. I know the House passed a bill, but it died in the Senate. Do you expect more debate over pipeline rules?
Well, I think that is a conversation that never goes away when you're talking about personal property rights, juxtaposed against a predictable regulatory climate. Those are both values that Republicans hold dear, and so it's hard to come to some consensus on what that should look like, right? So as I told many of my members, come to me with a plan that can get you 26 votes, and we'll see what we can do with it. But the reality of it is very, very hard to find a consensus when you have two deeply held virtues that impact our party and our state. I tell you what, I'm a solid property rights person, but I also know that we only keep Iowa economically viable when we have a predictable regulatory climate, and so anything we do has to balance those two demands.
Yeah. In a lot of states where one party controls both the legislature and the governor's office, we can see sort of intra-party feuds stalling legislation. Tell me about the Iowa story. I mean, how's the relationship between you and Speaker Grassley and Governor Reynolds?
Well, I tell you what, we work pretty well together. I mean, it's a fairly well-oiled machine in Iowa. You might have noticed by the heavy lifts that we get passed. It's not like we take on small issues and leave those big ones to the side because we can't come to some agreement. I won't say it's all sunshine and roses, right? Because you do have different personalities and different priorities, and people from different districts have different needs. But we work pretty well together to come to a consensus that we can all get on board with, and I think that's evidenced by the legislation that we end up moving through.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple of times that Iowa's budget is in pretty good shape relative to some other states. But I know a lot of lawmakers around the country are sort of anxious about the next downturn.
Sure.
What plans are you making? I mean, you've been there long enough to remember the dark days of the recession.
Right.
What sort of plans are you making for the long term?
Well, and I think that's evidenced in the tax cuts that we did pass, right? We have our rainy day funds full. So if something goes awry, those funds are full. Those funds are available to us to be able to have a seamless continuity of services for folks here in Iowa. In addition to that, our taxpayer trust fund is something in the neighborhood of $2.8 billion, which for some large states might not sound like a lot, but Iowa's budget's just over 10 billion. So we have a as a percentage of our budget, we have a very large percentage of our budget in a taxpayer trust fund that will allow our tax cuts to seamlessly go into place, even if there's a financial downturn. And on top of that, we have over $1.5 billion in ending fund balance. I mean, we are doing really, really well financially. And how you do well financially is to be conservative in your spending practices so that your spending doesn't outweigh your revenues, and have solid forecasting measures in place, and keep those forecasting measures conservative. I will tell you that our revenues have exceeded our forecasted revenues every time for the last several years. And so I would say just having those rainy day funds in place, and not cutting taxes or increasing expenditures outside of what the forecast looks like is frankly the best way to keep your budget stable.
Yeah. 2024 is, of course, an election year, kicking off with the Iowa caucuses. Tell us about the political climate in Iowa. What are we walking into next year?
Political climate in Iowa. Well, once we get past the caucuses on January 15th, I can tell you a little bit more about that. I think right now Republicans are really in the process of vetting the candidates, and we'll see what that conclusion looks like for the presidential race on January 15th. Post that, I see most Iowans are relatively happy with the direction that state government's going. They like the fact that we're being conservative in our spending. They like the fact that we're keeping a consistent regulatory climate for businesses. They like the fact that we're cutting their taxes so that they're able to keep more of their money in their pockets. I would anticipate not a lot of drama in our local elections in our state elections as we move into this next cycle.
Yeah. Okay. You've backed Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in the caucuses. How do you like his chances?
I'm happy with his chances. He's been to all 99 counties. He's getting out. He's meeting and greeting the people of the state of Iowa. I think it's fabulous. I've had a lot of out of state media come to me and they say, "Well, I see people wearing a DeSantis sticker, but they won't confirm that they're going to caucus for him." I said, "Nope, and they won't until January 15th. That's how Iowans roll. We want to make sure that the person we're backing is the right person for the job, and so we will come into caucus night and make our decision then in a lot of cases." But I like his chances. When you look at that October poll, that was kind of a really comprehensive poll of where Iowans stood. Governor DeSantis had the highest net voter approval rating. And when you look at candidates' first and second choices by the voters, he was virtually tied with the former president. And so I would say on caucus night, they're going to see that he came to all 99 counties, that he has a plan for our future, that he can serve for a full 8 years, that he committed himself to serving in the military when he could have gone and gotten a lucrative private sector job. And I think he'll come out really well.
Yeah. What's that old joke? The Iowan who won't tell you how they think about a candidate. They've only met him 5 or 6 times, right?
Right. I often say that if you live in Iowa and you haven't met a president or a presidential candidate, it's because you're actively avoiding them.
All right. Well, Iowa Senate President Amy Sinclair, thanks so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. We'll be watching Iowa this year, and if last year's any indication, you'll be making a lot of news again.
Thanks, Reed, very much. I appreciate being on.
Our thanks to Senator Sinclair. If you missed our Blue State Legislative Preview from Tuesday, you can find it on our website, pluribusnews.com. We had a great chat with 4 legislative leaders, so head over there and check it out. All right, let's bring in our last guest of the day. I'm happy to welcome West Virginia House Speaker Roger Hanshaw. Speaker Hanshaw is serving his 5th term in the House, where he represents Clay County near Charleston. Speaker Hanshaw, welcome.
Thank you.
Your members return to the Capitol January 10th. I know you're already back for some interim committees. What are your top priorities for the year ahead? Take me through the next session.
Reed, my top priority will always be economic growth and economic diversification for the state of West Virginia. We're an economy still in transition here from one that was largely extractive industry based for 2 centuries to one that's now leapfrogging where we are at present and embracing a 21st century technology economy here. And just before I came to this interview, I left a panel on development and expansion of the aerospace industry in West Virginia that's going on on the grounds of our Capitol, literally as we're speaking today. So economic diversification will always be my personal top priority as a legislator. Now, outside of my priorities, I know that our members continue to take a great interest in our overall budget structure. How do we deal with the remainder of the federal funds that have flowed into all the states around the country, including West Virginia? We are still in receipt of a significant amount of that federal money, and we're expected to be in receipt of another $1.2 billion for federal broadband infrastructure beginning in 2024. So allocating those resources properly is a top priority for all of us. We continue to be interested in making sure that we have a public education system that properly prepares a 21st century workforce. That's of paramount consideration to many, myself included. I'm married to a public school teacher here in West Virginia, so we care deeply about whether we're turning out a work product in the form of a well-prepared workforce and a student population that's prepared to go on and be successful. And lastly, if I keep it to three, the healthcare economy is continuing to be a priority for leaders of legislatures in all states. Red, blue, north, south, east, west. The healthcare economy is something that we all discuss when leaders of legislatures across the country are all together. How are we navigating the expanding federal healthcare bureaucracy and making sure that we're still able to deliver healthcare in the 50 states? How do we make sure that we're utilizing the precious resources that we all have as legislators to get the biggest return on that healthcare investment? We know that without a well-trained workforce, our economies don't grow, but we also know that without a healthy workforce, our economies don't grow. So those continue to be priorities for all of us. I know they're priorities for us here in West Virginia.
Yeah, a lot of what you and I have talked about in the past sort of revolves around that workforce issue, right? And
it does. It really does.
Developing not just the skills for today, but the skills for tomorrow, and making sure you have the population necessary to sort of support that economy. What role can the legislature play in promoting those next generation jobs, in bringing the workforce to your state at a time when the state's population hasn't grown as fast as the rest of the country?
Yeah, it's everything, Reed, from making sure that the curriculum being taught in our public schools matches the expectations of employers in the economy today, to making sure that our young people and students who are in foster care are being adequately educated, that they aren't being forced to bounce from school to school to school, but are actually able to live and be educated in a consistent, nurturing environment. It's making sure that we're adequately compensating our teachers and public school employees so that we're attracting people to that workforce as well to deliver the education to our public school students. We expect to advance another pay raise for public employees, including public school teachers, this coming legislative session. Governor Justice here in West Virginia has said that publicly on more than one occasion, that he will call for that in his State of the State address next month. We expect that he will offer that bill for our consideration as well. Read going on here in our Capitol building today is an exhibition by young people from all across West Virginia that are here in the Capitol to demonstrate their coding skills. So we have a Capitol building full of robots today. We have a Capitol building full of robots and autonomous devices built and programmed by students as young as kindergarten here in West Virginia today. So we want to make sure that we're properly resourcing that kind of 21st century instruction. So legislatures have quite a role to play here. There'll never be a more important role in education than the role of parents. That's just, you cannot replace that. And if we as a society ever begin believing that the public schools can fill the role of parents, that's a terrible mistake. But we do need to make sure that the education we're delivering in our public school system is congruent with the expectations of employers in a new 21st century economy.
And watch out for those robots. I think I saw an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie about them a while ago. It was a little unsettling.
Well, I saw one shoot a basket just a moment ago with
that's pretty cool.
A small basketball setup.
That's pretty cool. As you think about the accomplishments that West Virginia's lawmakers have achieved over the last couple of years, What's one thing that you've done that you think the rest of the country should be following? What's something that you like to brag about when you're talking to other leaders around the country?
It's the single most important thing that I think I have worked on as a legislator in 9 years, Reed. Last year, we were able to pass, and the governor was kind enough to sign into law a proposal that put a teacher's aide in every kindergarten, first, second, and third grade classroom in the state of West Virginia. The data is very clear that young people who don't learn to read and can't read well by the time they finish third grade struggle to ever be successful in education and in the workforce. So we really made a substantial, permanent, ongoing investment last year in really staffing up the teaching professionals in grades K through 3 in West Virginia. I'm expecting that to pay substantial dividends here for our state.
Yeah. Flip that question around then. What's something that you've seen happen in another state or several other states that you want West Virginia to emulate?
Yeah, so we are actively considering here how we fund our ongoing economic development apparatus in West Virginia. So we've been blessed with budget surpluses over the course of the past 5 or 6 years here. As a consequence, we've been able to make some fairly historic investments in economic development here. We've been able to recruit billions of dollars in investment here to the state of West Virginia in the past 5 years. But that takes money. It takes resources to be able to play in that economic development sector the way we want to. We need to make sure that we've got an ongoing revenue stream that will give us the capacity and the potential to keep doing that if and when those budget surpluses are no longer sustained.
Yeah, yeah.
There are states that do that very well. There are states that fund that portion of their ongoing programmatic portfolio with dedicated sources of revenue with particular taxes. We're exploring some of those now. We're looking at the models that other states around us have adopted and asking, does one of them fit particularly well with what we have here as the state of West Virginia?
Yeah, yeah. Touching on that sort of caution on the budget note there. I mean, Virginia's budget is in pretty good shape relative to some other states, but I know lawmakers are always anxious about the next downturn. What are your budget writers thinking about? What do you want them to be preparing for, so that you don't get sort of over your skis when things inevitably go bad?
Yeah, our revenue projections for fiscal year 2025 are still strong. So when we meet with Governor Justice's administration to talk about what our upcoming budget cycle will look like, we are still projected to be in a surplus environment. We've held a relatively flat budget here in West Virginia for the last 5 years. That's largely been the source of our surpluses, Reed. So we've been able to do the economic development and investments that we're discussing now, largely because we've maintained a flat budget and really held at bay the natural growth that state budgets experience. So we have to be sure we continue to do that, and then the pressures there, of course, are substantial. But we're expecting another fairly strong fiscal year for 2025.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I hope that I hope those numbers sustain.
So do we.
Yeah. I've read that some of your members are considering new school discipline legislation. You talked about education a lot. I mean, talk about sort of what's going to come, what changes are going to come inside the classroom itself.
Yeah, so we don't have a specific proposal written to that end yet, Reed, but it is something about which we speak a lot. So last legislative session, for example, we did discuss a bill on the floor of the House related to the circumstances under which a public school may expel a student for behavioral reasons. I mean, we want to honor our constitutional obligations to provide a thorough and efficient education system for all children, but we also want to make sure that we aren't handicapping the teacher's ability to deliver that education for everybody else in that classroom. So as I said just a moment ago, I'm married to a public school teacher. I hear about that firsthand. And if we don't adequately give the school employees and the school administrators the flexibility to invoke disciplinary measures if and when they're needed, then we can't deliver education at all. So I can't speak with particularity about what we may consider this session, except to say that our members are talking about it a lot.
Yeah. You and I talked, I think it was about a year ago, when you attended, I think, the opening of a new electric bus manufacturing facility, right? That was the big hot topic among legislators last year. As you're looking forward, I mean, what's the next groundbreaking technology that you're putting all this economic development effort towards? I mean, is it AI? Is it something else? What's the future?
Yeah, that bus manufacturing company is now in operation, Reed. In fact, on Wednesday morning of this week, I'm scheduled to drive one of the buses out of their manufacturing plant at their grand ribbon cutting ceremony. So that's been successful. We're beginning to really talk a lot about battery technology here, Reed, and what it takes to provide energy in a 21st century economy. So we've provided energy for 200 years here as the state of West Virginia. We want to provide it for 200 more, but we know that we won't provide it the same way even 5 years from now as we have provided it for the last 200 years. And one of those areas is battery technology. Now, the interesting thing about 21st century batteries is that they're being packed and developed from technology that nevertheless still utilizes some of our natural resources. So we're meeting often with battery companies here that will utilize West Virginia natural resources to produce and develop 21st century battery technology. So that normally comes in the form of graphite. So we're attracting a substantial number of graphite producers here to West Virginia. I've begun referring to the graphite hills of West Virginia in the same way that people refer to the Silicon Valley of California, because I believe it can have that kind of transformational effect on our economy.
Yeah. Gotcha. Of course, 2024 is an election year. There's some big races up in West Virginia, U.S. Senate seat, the governor's race is open, several other statewide races. How's the political landscape shaping up? What are issues are voters talking to you about when you meet them in your community?
You know, Reed, most elections in most places are similar, no matter how different we may be at the macro level, state to state. At the micro level, the district, or at the level of legislative districts, for example, people want their roads paved. They want their schools open. They want to be able to work in their communities. And after that, they often just want to be left alone to live life and do what they do. So at the highest levels of electoral politics, at least here in our state, people are extraordinarily concerned about the dysfunctionality of Congress, the dysfunctionality of our federal government. It's been dysfunctional for a long time, but it's particularly acute now as we watch what happens in national news. We're careening towards yet another impending federal government shutdown now. I don't know if we'll get there by the end of the calendar year or not, but people do talk about those things. People do take notice of how the inactivity and inability to function at the federal level trickles down all the way to Main Street America, because it does impact people's lives. So folks do talk about that. Here in West Virginia, we still talk a lot about the future of our economic growth and trajectory. Do we have the right leadership in place to bring economic opportunity to some disadvantaged areas of West Virginia? We're very proud of what we've been able to accomplish over the course of about the past decade now in terms of economic growth and diversification, but it still remains the number one issue cited by voters when you see opinion polls or do man on the street type interviews. It remains the number one issue that's top of mind for voters.
Gotcha. All right. West Virginia House Speaker Roger Henshaw, thanks so much for joining us today, and best of luck for next session.
Okay, Reed, thank you.
I want to extend my thanks to Utah Speaker Mike Schultz, Iowa Senate President Amy Sinclair, and West Virginia Speaker Roger Henshaw. And my thanks to all of you for watching. Don't forget, please become a member of Pluribus News today, pluribusnews.com/subscribe. Use the code NEWYEAR at checkout and save 60%. Thanks again for watching. We'll keep tabs on all these big stories when legislative sessions begin next year. Have a great holiday, and thanks for being a part of the Pluribus News community.